You're listening to The Fire Break with Steve Wolf. Welcome back to The Fire Break. I'm Steve Wolf. As you know, the Fire Break is sponsored by Team Wildfire. Check us out on the web at teamwildfire.com. We're developing some innovative technologies for putting out wildfires. I've got a really cool guest with me today. I've got Cindy Devlin-Musick, and she is the Director of Vegetation Management for the Rappahannock Electric Cooperative. So, Cindy, tell me, what does vegetation management look like for you? And why did, of all the careers in the world, were you drawn to this one?
Oh, wow. Well, that's a few questions. At Rappahannock, which is based in the central part of Virginia, we cover 22 counties, about 7,500 miles of overhead line distribution, and we are primarily a distribution electric co-op. A co-op's a little bit different from an investor-owned utility. We're actually owned by our members. And so every decision we make is made in the best interest of how do we serve our members the best. And so trees cause about 70 to 80% of our power outages, interruptions to our members. And so we proactively trim 1/5 of our system every year, using a variety of tools, bucket trucks and chainsaws and chippers and folks that climb trees and trim them, and folks that trim them from bucket trucks, and occasionally an aerial saw with helicopters.
That's
And
the coolest thing in the world, right?
it is. Helicopter week's coming up soon, and it's always exciting. We basically say we want to use the right tool in the toolbox for the right area. And so if something is really inaccessible, that's a great place to use an aerial saw. If it's in someone's front yard, of course, we want to prune that tree as carefully as possible. So that work happens on a 5-year cycle, 20% of our system every year, about 1,500 miles. It's a great way for us to interact with our members. They know that we're going to be there front and center on their property at some point. And that's just to prevent outages from trees growing in from the side or growing up from underneath or kind of blowing in. And trees can grow a tremendous amount in 5 years, and forest health conditions can change dramatically. So right about that mid-year point, about year 2.5, we take a really hard look at analytics and look at data and see how that circuit's performing after the right-of-way maintenance has occurred. And so I mentioned outages, and that's kind of how we're driven with the majority of this work. We don't ever want trees growing or blowing into the lines and
Falling on them, I guess, right?
right. But about 60 to 70% of our trees caused outages are from trees that are way outside of our easement, way outside of the right of way, and they do fall. And when they fall, they break poles, and they put transformers on the ground, and they put wire on the ground, and it becomes a big restoration event instead of just just like a flipping a fuse, or if lightning strikes or a squirrel strikes, you're in there with digger derricks and big equipment, digging out, pulling out the broken pole, replacing it, splicing wire back together. It's what we're trying to avoid. So we do what's called a mid-cycle maintenance right about that 2.5-year point, and we actually have certified arborists going up in the woods and taking a look at the base of trees. If that tree can fall and strike our facilities, and we see some kind of issue with it, whether it's compromised by fire, whether it's compromised by some kind of forest health concern. We've had emerald ash borer in the Midwest and the East Coast the last few years, and it's just wreaked havoc on that particular species. If there's some reason that we think that it's going to fall, and these are certified arborists and foresters with a great deal of experience. So they're marking those trees. They're talking to the tree owner. REC or Rappahannock Electric doesn't own any trees. So, we're getting permission to get those on the ground, neutralize them so that they're not going to come over. So we do a lot of preventive maintenance along those lines. This past year, we actually supplemented that with some satellite data.
Wow.
Coolest thing ever. I've been at this 33 years. And if it had existed 33 years ago, it would have just, kind of been amazing. It didn't, but it does now. And what it is, satellites, I think it's about 12 to 15 miles up, take a look at certain corridors, certain circuits from a substation to a substation based on, how we want them tasked. And they look at chlorophyll in the leaf surface. And they determine, based on what trees are around them, the trees that are in decline, meaning they have less of a percentage of chlorophyll in that leaf surface. And we're the trust but verify camp. So those certified arborists that I was telling you about, who are there's 9 of them total on Rappahannock, plus me, I am too. And so they'll go out and ground truth it and actually walk around the base of the tree. And 9 times out of 10, they say, oh yeah, look at the base of this. Sometimes you can put your hand right through the middle.
Wow.
Or, and these trees can be anywhere from 20, 30, 40, 50 feet back, depending on the height of the tree, the height of the pole, the slope of the ground. And so it's, it's basic geometry 101 to determine that, but they can actually determine that from space now. So it's narrowing down that needle in the haystack to go, okay, we've got this one we want to go look at. Often, or usually in a forest condition, trees share root systems. They're kind of intertwined. They're all in the upper 12 inches of the soil, and they're kind of a mat that spreads over the forest floor. And so if there's a forest health condition, it's often related to root decay or root disease, and they share root systems. So if one has it, there's a good chance that there's a couple of other ones that maybe might be sharing the same illness.
And that's because they're not flossing, right?
Yeah. So let's see what else. The year following clearing, we go back with a low volume foliar herbicide. We conduct what's called integrated vegetation management. So we're just treating tall growing species that can grow up and actually grow into the line. We're leaving everything else: forbs, flowers, pollinator habitat, grasses, all those native things that you want on the floor of a early succession forest. That stays. The only thing that goes is tall growing trees. So those are treated individually. Guys with backpacks just go up to that individual tree and just treat a little bit. And what it does is suppresses forest succession. So think about, after you have maybe a forest harvest somewhere, and there's, 20 acres and it's thinned or cleared or what have you. And you have all of those really interesting things regenerating out of the soil because the seed source is already there. So it's kind of maintaining that area right under the right-of-way, with those power lines overhead in a early forest succession habitat. So it's great for songbirds, great for butterflies, especially monarchs, which we've had a massive decline in the last 20 years. It creates habitat all over the place, and it's great for us because we know that no matter what else we're doing on those 7,500 miles of linear right-of-way,
wow,
we've got some habitat that we've helped to maintain. So, and it's about 40 feet wide. Can't do the math that quick, but it's quite a bit.
Right. If you're to turn that into square miles, it's a few of them, right?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
it is.
Wow, that's really neat. So this is a chemical that you spray, and it just basically keeps the vegetation at the young stage, so it doesn't become at the mature stage where it would get really tall. Is that right?
Correct.
Is this a chemical that could also work like on puppies so that you could just that way you could just have a permanent puppy?
Oh, wouldn't that be nice?
Oh my gosh, that'd be so cool. I mean,
Especially,
no offense to my dogs that are grown now, but
yeah, baby beagles. That would be the best. Just slew of them because they get big and
absolutely.
they howl and they're really loud and
Do you
they.
ever have issues with customers, or you guys have different opinions? Where you feel a tree needs to go or to be trimmed, and they say this is my beloved tree, and I don't want you to touch it.
Absolutely. It'd be disappointing if we didn't. Um, we do. And so, we try to accommodate, the best we can. We try to educate. Um, we've all learned more about trees in the last 20 years and tree biology and tree morphology and tree biomechanics and why trees fail. We've actually been conducting a study at REC for the last 4 years related to, okay, well, we've got all these trees failing from outside of the right of way. Why does that happen? So we've actually gone out and investigated about 1,200. Actually, we're up to about 1,500 now, looking at the root systems, looking at the tree structure, and the diameter, the species, the slope, the soil conditions, forest health conditions, everything we can possibly get at to determine why this has happened. Sometimes it's a blue sky, beautiful day, and a tree fails. Why does that happen? So
It
we,
was its time.
yeah, yeah. I mean, just like us, trees have a beginning, middle, and end. But sometimes there's other issues going on, and so that's what we've been trying to learn. Um, it's part of a PhD program too
Ah, okay.
that I've
So
been working on.
you said trees have a beginning, middle, and end, and I know there's some trees out there that are thousands of years old. So does a tree have a lifespan that's independent of the environment that it's in, or is it the case that as long as the environment is good, the tree will persist,
Um,
or both?
yeah, it's kind of both. I mean, we're on the East Coast here, and for the most part, everything that you see that's trees here was fields 100 years ago
Okay.
and 200 years ago. It was all cleared for ag. And you can kind of look at the way our system's built, and sometimes it'll go across the country and there'll be trees on either side and they're all about that 75-100-year-old stage,
Yeah.
sometimes a little less. Trees grow really fast, and you'll say, now why did they build this here in the middle of the woods? Well, they didn't. When they built it, it was built by farmers. That's the whole history of the electric cooperative system. It was built by farmers for farmers because the big utilities, invest around utilities, there weren't enough meters per mile to make it worth their while to
Yeah.
put up poles and wires. It was expensive. So, the landscape has changed, and that's why there's so many trees to deal with now. And so we just kind of take it as it comes. But in terms of age, that's a really good question. And I don't think we really know all that well in North America because, I mean, we do in the national parks, where we haven't ever had harvesting. And we probably do in some really steep, hard to get at areas. Um, but just as a common rule, most of our East Coast forests are somewhere between 50 and 100 years old, and they're big.
They're huge, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things I was wondering about is, they used to say, like, to like use a rag for cleaning things and save paper towels, because save a tree was the idea, right? Oh,
Hmm.
oh, don't put that in a bag for me, I'll save a tree.
Hmm.
But the fact of the matter is, like, there's no shortage of pulp, right? Like the trees are constantly growing, making new pulp all the time, and things I would imagine things like your tree trimmings, there's no dimensional lumber in there, right? There's no value to that material like other than as pulp. So does it make sense to to create and maintain a market for pulp products?
So depending on where you're at and depending on the age of the trees and whether they're hardwoods or whether they're pines, and we have a really healthy mix. We have actually three distinct ecosystems within our service territory. From the mountains, we border and we actually serve Shenandoah National Park. And then down to
Beautiful park.
Piedmont. Oh, it's spectacular, spectacular. And all the way down to the coastal plain. So the species composition is a little bit different depending on where you're at. And sometimes there are board feet in, an individual tree. Often, we're not taking that down because, we're never taking it down because of the timber value. We're taking it down
Right.
because it's got a hole in the base, or it's split at the top, or there's some other forest, tree health issue that needs to be mitigated. So before it falls. In terms of the trimmings, what we trim from the side and what we mow underneath every 5 years. A lot of that just stays on site. It decomposes.
I
We
see.
cut it up as small as possible. If we're trimming trees that we're in an area that's kind of maintained where we're chipping the brush, our members want those chips and they line up.
Really?
And
Yeah.
it's a 9 cubic foot split dump truck. And I don't want to say they fight each other. I just want to say that
It's competitive.
it's a
Right.
hot commodity.
Yeah.
And we don't want to move that material. We want to leave it on site as much as possible. So if somebody says, "Hey, I want all the chips from my trees here," well, of course, they're yours. And so people use them for ag, they use them for animals and, pigs and chickens and that kind of thing. And trails and just mulch around their property. You have to let it sit for about 30 days, let those microbes do their thing and get it nice and productive. And then of course keep it away from your house. But
Right.
we don't dump any of it, and we don't transport any of it because that would kind of negate the environmental benefit of it, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Moving it 20, 30 miles or whatever. So it's one of those really sustainable practices that we don't talk about too much. But the work has to be done. You have to keep trees from growing into the wires and blowing into the wires. And but as much as possible, we keep that material right there for our members.
Okay. And the reason that we have to keep trees away from the power lines is because the power lines are up above the trees in those areas, right? And trees will either blow over or ice down or
Mm-hmm.
all those things that happen. So
Mm-hmm.
that does create an obvious appeal for buried lines. Um,
It does. Yeah.
right. So are buried lines just not buried because it's way more expensive to put them in the ground than to string them in the air?
Yeah. So in our case, if there's a really dense new development and REC, like a lot of utilities in the Southeast, is growing just um, with new housing, and people can kind of live wherever they want to, and they choose us. They choose our territory to live in. Virginia is a beautiful state, and so in areas where it's a new housing development and the housing is kind of close together, that kind of thing. Yes, those are all put in underground, and they have been for quite some time. But we're a rural electric co-op. So in areas where there's maybe half a mile between meters or addresses, that's a lot of expense that would be shared by all our members. So strategic undergrounding is a definite, it's a thing, and but there's a time and a place for it, and so we look at that individually. But it costs about 7 times the amount of overhead lines, and those overhead lines, once you put them in, um, unless a tree comes over and breaks the pole, those poles can last 50, 60 years. It's kind of
I see.
amazing the lifespan of wood poles and overhead lines. And so that cost is a lot lower, overall. Yes, you have to maintain them. Yes, you have to trim the trees around them. But when you compare it to burying a mile of line, it's significantly less expensive. And of course, we're a co-op, so all of our members share that expense. And the other thing that when people are talking about overhead versus underground and the pros and cons, I always think of the trees. A third of the tree grows underground. So if you're going to take that line from overhead and you're going to bury it, all those root systems are on the upper 12 inches of the
Right.
soil. And you're going to impact those root systems. And the number one reason that trees die when they're first put in, it's because of lack of water or weed whacker, kind of
Yeah.
hits the base. The second reason is impact to roots. So compaction or disturbance or cutting those main buttress roots or what have you, it has a dramatic effect. That's how the tree lives and breathes, is from the root system.
I see. So in cases where you have the power lines running along the roadside, there's a double maintenance benefit, right? Because you've got to keep trees off of the road and off of the power lines at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably you get a twofer there. So,
Yeah, yeah.
so you talked about a lot of people moving into the Virginia area because
Mm-hmm.
it's a beautiful area. When I think Virginia, I think fall foliage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll tap your vegetation knowledge here just for my own
Uh-oh.
benefit.
Okay.
Uh-oh.
I'll
Okay.
get my
So,
phone ready to.
all right, pull out, yeah, pull out your resources. So, what causes beautiful fall foliage? What makes the leaves change to those beautiful oranges and reds and yellows?
Oh, okay. It's simply a decline in chlorophyll, which is directly related to the lower amount of sunlight that happens, during the seasons. Right now, we have at least 12, 13, 14 hours of sunlight, and um, I think that peaks sometime in June, July with the summer solstice, and then it starts going away, and the days get shorter and the chlorophyll declines, and so you're actually seeing the underlying tones of what's in those leaves with the absence of chlorophyll.
So the leaves are saying like I was orange all along. You just couldn't tell because the
You
chlorophyll.
couldn't see me. You couldn't see me.
I feel seen now.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
So
they're beautiful though, and we have quite a it depends on the year, how much rain we get, and if there's any fall storms right around October, September, October. Sometimes you get like one beautiful, glorious weekend, and then they're on the ground. And
uh-huh.
it was hard for me when I first moved up north from Florida. I had never seen change of seasons at all,
Oh wow.
and everything's green. Pretty much. I mean, we have some trees that lose their leaves in the winter, but mostly it's green. And boy, that first time that I saw all the leaves, I was just outside nonstop. I was up in forestry school and, checking it out. And I didn't realize it was such a short window that you saw them. And then everything looked, dead for a few
Yeah. Right.
months. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that was a shock.
So once they go down, the leaves are on the ground, and I'm not talking about forest wide because that's ridiculous to. But for homeowners, when the leaves are down, should you leave them? Should you rake them? Should you bag them? Should you mulch them?
Yeah.
What's best for the microclimate around your home?
It's funny you bring that up because until recently we just moved into a new house, and that's a whole story in itself. But we lived in a neighborhood where every morning I would wake up to the sound of leaf blowers, and it was a probably 45 to 50% tree canopy in this neighborhood that we lived in, and it about acre and a half lots. And the county in this old 1950s neighborhood, so not that old, but oldish for Northern Virginia, would come and suck up all the leaves. And so you'd have these 6 foot tall piles all around the neighborhood. And so the county's fallen on hard times. I don't really think so. They've just chosen to spend their money on something else. And they sent out this survey saying, we're not going to collect leaves anymore, because they were doing it like 4 or 5 times during a fall. And a lot of the properties actually had people that blew them for them. They weren't raking or blowing
Yeah.
their own leaves. They had services doing it. Everybody works. It's where I live is the DC metro area, so it's like 60-hour work weeks is pretty normal. So everybody does something else for you, yard wise. And anyway, so there was just up in arms. What do you mean you're going to stop? And so there's listservs, and there's newspaper opinion pieces, and you have it. So anyway, long story short, I may have made a few emails out to listservs saying, just go ahead and mulch it.
Yeah.
Just get it.
So is it
Set your mower down lower,
right?
chop it all up. It's going to decompose over the next few weeks. You're going to have a much nicer lawn next year because you've kind of just fertilized everything, and didn't go over so well. But
it is true. Like that is the best thing for, right? That the leaves contain nutrients, and when you mulch them, it goes back in the soil. And if the tree roots are right underneath the top of the soil,
right,
it gives them an opportunity to reclaim those nutrients.
right. And the other thing is, I think we're starting to kind of take a second look at how much lawn do we need?
Yeah, right.
Are we better with perennial plants that have some wildlife value or pollinator value?
Or lettuce. Arugula.
Yeah. Or, let's plant some more trees, and let's kind of, keep those leaves underneath those trees. And, there's another big movement, and that's to just reduce the size of your lawn, because lawns require a lot of maintenance.
Yeah.
A lot of mowing, a lot of fertilizing, a lot, there's a lot that goes into keeping it looking like a lawn.
Yeah, right.
And is that
AstroTurf?
Yeah. So, there's hurdles with that, with HOAs and, ordinances and, just general rules. But yeah, it's not a bad idea to say, hey, could I just reduce it by maybe 10% this year and then see what it looks like?
Yeah, right. Where you put a bunch of rocks in a big circle and you don't mow in that area, and you say that's my pollinator area.
Right. Yeah.
I think that looks nice. Yeah, because lawns are a huge suck on the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they water, chemicals, maintenance, polluting equipment to mow it, trim it, edge it. And what's the ag byproduct? Nothing.
Right.
Clippings.
Right.
That then also have to be dealt with.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I get it. You want a place for your kids to play football, or you want a place to...
Yeah, they could do it at school.
Yeah. Or putt a few balls, or, whatever. But
go down to the park.
Yeah. Right. If you've got that.
Yeah. Well, I think the consequences of a lot of lawn, not so good. I live in an area where they're in the process of enacting a ban on 2-cycle lawn equipment because the pollution factor is huge.
It is.
So they're moving to all electric on that.
Mm-hmm.
That way we can support more people digging cadmium out of their backyards in China.
Yeah, there's always something.
Always a trade-off, right?
Yeah.
That's super. Well, that's really fascinating how you took your background in forestry and put it to the service of helping people get electricity, which I bet they really appreciate.
They might.
They might, yeah. And plus, being in a...
People are like me. My father worked for a power company for 40 years. He was a transmission engineer. I grew up in Florida, and it never occurred to me that there were crews out trimming trees around the power lines, and that was a thing. When I went to forestry school, I wanted to go sit in a fire tower in Montana and read a book and kind of be left alone like most people go into forestry for. It never occurred to me that there was a whole industry, and it's an $8 billion industry
Wow.
related to preventing tree caused outages.
I had no idea.
Hmm.
Wow, I've been wasting all my time on fire management technology. I had no idea that this whole tree contact thing was such a big business. I'm going to get busy on that.
It is, and it's
Wow.
expensive. You think about the training that goes into somebody that climbs into a bucket or
Yep.
climbs a tree and they're within 10 feet of an energized conductor.
Yeah, sounds like a good job for a robot
Yeah.
or something, right?
Hmm.
Laser.
Hmm.
I don't know if you know there's a guy in Israel working on a program for trimming trees using 10 megawatt lasers that are either based in trucks or based in helicopters.
I've
And he
seen the
can just,
videos. Yeah.
yeah, isn't that crazy?
Yeah. I think the folks that I've hired within the last 5 years, I think they're going to probably get to mess around with that in a few years. I'll probably
The,
be.
the folks you hired, you said?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, yeah.
I have a great team of 9 professional herborists that go out and audit the work and talk to landowners and make sure the work's being done safely by our contractor partners. And they're on average 10 to 20 years younger than me, so they're gonna get to see all the cool laser stuff, and everything goes electric for with saws and hydraulic saws and trucks and everything. And I'm getting to see a little bit of that, but I'm kind of on the tail end of this career. So
Yeah, well, you got to see bucket trucks you know,
hmm.
and those young kids will get to see the laser trimmers. You
Yeah.
know, they'll
Yeah.
they'll be blown away by the technology that their great grandchildren use.
Right.
So,
Right.
or maybe we don't even have power lines, and we'll just have power beamed to each home
Yeah.
from a satellite.
Little
Yeah,
cells, little microgrids.
who knows what it'll be? Well, that's fascinating. Thank you so much, Cindy, for sharing a little bit of your background and giving me a peek into the world of vegetation management. It's really really interesting.
You are so welcome. Thanks for having me.
You bet. All right, this is Cindy Devlin-Musick from the Rappahannock Electric Cooperative in Falls Church, Virginia. And Cindy, if people have questions of you, they want to learn more about veg management, um, that eat your vegetables. Is that what it comes down to? No. Right. Right.
I should say one thing. We are not based in Falls Church. I live in Falls Church,
You
but
live in Falls Church.
our
Okay.
Rappahannock Electric Cooperative is based in Fredericksburg, Virginia.
Oh my God, even more beautiful. Okay, well
Yeah.
maybe not very beautiful, I'll say. Yeah. Uh,
Thank-
Excellent. What's the best way for people to reach out to you?
Email's fine. It's cmusic at myrec.coop.
Catchy.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Cindy, thanks so much for joining us. It was a pleasure getting to learn more about you and what you do. And folks who've been watching or listening to the Fire Break right here, I'm Steve Wolf. We're sponsored by Team Wildfire. Catch us on the web at teamwildfire.com. Keep learning. There's a lot of cool stuff to know out there, and take good care of yourself. See you at the next one.